Piemonte. Welcome, everybody. It's so nice to look at the list of names and see people that I've traveled with in the past, and I hope to travel with again. And I'm excited to take you through our trip in late October, November of this year in the little known, which is strange, little known region of Piemonte. So this is our gang. We were small but mighty, and for me, it was such a pleasure to travel with a well-traveled group of people who are just interested in exploring. And it was really, for me, like traveling with a group of friends. I think that they would agree. Now, the first question that I always am asked about Piemonte is just, where is it? Nobody's heard of it, which is kind of shocking, though it's getting some more press. I just read some articles about it in Forbes and New York Times. So it's starting to get more press here in the US, but Piemonte is right up against Switzerland and France. So the very northwestern area of Piemonte. But the great thing for us is that Piemonte is not really well known. So even in a peak season, like the season we're going to be there, it's still very reasonable and fun, and you get an authentic experience. There's more Italians around than there are people from other countries, which is great. So this was our itinerary for this fall. We started in the capital city, Torino, and then we went out to the beautiful countryside filled with vineyards. Le Langhe is what it's called. Lots and lots of beautiful little towns. And then we finished at Lago Maggiore, Lake Maggiore. Torino, when we were there just at the end of October, which is when they started to put up their Christmas lights, which was fun. And you can see here that they lit up the fountains. And this one, I took a photo of this beautiful, elegant street because my husband's an astronomer. And it was filled, the whole length of this big boulevard was filled with different constellations. This is a royal city. It's the home of the kings of Italy and has been a capital for centuries. It feels a lot more like you might see a place in France or Vienna or Central Europe or Northern Europe than it does many places like Florence or Naples or Rome. It's filled with elegant bars, cafes, fantastic food, more Michelin star restaurants than any other city in Italy. Gorgeous shops, galleries, you can see it's just a really elegant city. But it's because of this Savoy family, this historic family that goes back as a noble family to the time of William the Conqueror, with their palaces, which we visited with our local guide, who was phenomenal. He's a local guide and historian who's actually written books in English about Piemonte. We visited the palaces together with him. And this royal palace that's in the center of Torino actually is the house that owns the most famous artifact in the city, which is the Shroud of Turin. This chapel was built, this is the cupola of the chapel that was built to hold that shroud. Now you can't see the shroud. It is conserved, as you can imagine, very delicate. You can't see it, but you can go into the chapel that is just magnificent, so much detail. Once again, elegantly designed. The architecture of this, you could spend an hour in there just looking at the cupola. It's incredible, indescribable. But I think one of the highlights for our time in Turin, and we have a couple of the members of the tour on the call today, I think they would agree with me that a highlight was our cooking class. And as we made our own pasta, we gained much more respect for this woman who is the pasta maker for the shop, where after they closed down the shop, we were able to learn from them how to hand make traditional pasta like agnolotti del Plin that's a meat filling, a little bit like a ravioli with rabbit, pork, or veal. But I think the pasta that gave us the most trouble and maybe the most entertainment were these capelletti, which are a lot like a tortellini shape with spinach and ricotta. You can see that we're filling them ourselves. Some of us had a better skill at this than others did. You can see Kella here on the right-hand side with her very well done cappelletti. Some of us, like me, needed a lot more help figuring out exactly how to close this pasta around our finger. And we learned the value of having small fingers versus fat fingers as we were trying to work with this smallish circle of dough to make the cappelletti. And of course, we got to eat it afterwards with a beautiful butter and sage. That's all you needed on this pasta. That's kind of a trademark of Italian cuisine, is they start with wonderful prime ingredients and then they don't make it complicated. It's fantastic. Another highlight for me in Torino, and I think a surprise for the people on the tour, was our visit to the Egyptian Museum. Now, we're in Italy. Why are we visiting an Egyptian museum? In Torino, they have the largest Egyptian museum outside of Cairo, and the oldest Egyptian museum in the world. Now, why would that be? We know about the Louvre, we know about the British Museum, we know about Jean-Francois Champollion, and we know about Napoleon. Well, Napoleon went down to Egypt, as I'm sure you all know, in the late 1700s, and ignited this craze for all things Egyptian, which then sparked a tremendous competition between the noble families and the wealthy families of Europe. And so we know about the historic competitions between England and France. But down in Italy was this very famous, powerful, wealthy family, the Savoy. Now, the Savoy, there was no Italy at the time, but there was this region called Savoy, which is now Piemonte. Well, the wealthy, powerful dukes of Savoy bought a collection from the King of Sardinia, who had bought a huge collection from the consul, the French consul, who was in charge of all antiquities down in Cairo. So all of this collection that was really destined for the Louvre, but, politics, financing, and all that, ended up in Turin and was established. They established the museum in the mid-1800s, dedicated completely to Egyptian antiquities. Now, Jean-Francois Champollion went several times to Turin. They had a tremendous collection of papyri, and he referred to Turin and the museum collection here by saying that the road to Memphis and Thebes passes through Turin, which is quite a statement coming from him. Now, later, in the turn of the century, the now Kingdom of Italy and the kings of France promoted or sponsored an expedition down to a town called Deir el Medina. Now, this is a place you might not ever have heard of, but this is the city of artisans. This is a city of the people who actually built the tombs in the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens. So this expedition that was led by an Italian archaeologist and sponsored by the King of Italy brought back all kinds of artifacts about the daily life of the workers who built these tombs. So incredible wealth of knowledge was brought back by these expeditions to the museum in Turin. Now here we're looking at ostracon, that's what these are called. And you can see that these are just, they didn't have paper. I mean, they had papyri, but that was very complicated and expensive to make. They had little shards of stone. So they would use them to sketch, to teach, to learn, and even to draw designs like this dancing woman here, who you would never see on the wall of a tomb in kind of a formal setting. So just looking at the different ostraca that they have in the museum gives a tremendous window into the life of the people who actually were the workers, about whom we know so little in most places. Now, it's also the home of the tomb of the architect Ka and his wife Merit. Now, we're looking here at the coffin of the wife Merit. This is one of the very few undiscovered disturbed, completely intact tombs that has ever been found. This tomb of the architect Ka, very rich in all of the furnishings and all of the accoutrement that we would expect from a royal tomb, because he was of great status. Including here, we have a golden cubit like from the biblical measuring apparatus for building in that time. This is a golden cubit that was a gift to Ka by the pharaohs. So we have the gifts that were given to him. We have the bread. This is 3,500-year-old bread that was found in this intact tomb, because as we know, the Egyptians were buried with all of the items that they would need in the afterlife, and even little clay models of how the bread was made and served. So we can see in this little maquette here exactly how the bread was served. But we see the bread. There is fat, so some kind of a lard. There are big bricks of salt and dried fruit like dates included. Now, one of the most interesting items that I think we'll all agree were the underwear from Ka. Now, you aren't going to see underwear in the British Museum or the Louvre. They actually have Egyptian 3,500-year-old underwear from the tomb of Ka. He would need that in the afterlife, after all. And what's really interesting, our Egyptologist guide explained to us that there's a little design on the front there, and that is actually the monogram of Ka. Now, what this tells the Egyptologists is that Ka wasn't doing his own laundry in his own palace or home. He was having it sent out to a local communal laundry, which would be why he needed to have a monogram on his underwear. So just a trove of information about daily life in ancient Egypt at this museum. Now, after Turin, we headed out in our beautiful little mini bus with our driver, and we went out into the countryside with all the gorgeous fall foliage of the vineyards and beautiful little towns like Monforte d'Alba, vineyards everywhere. Unlike other places in Italy, the mountains or the hills really are really covered with vineyards. As far as the eye can see, vineyards everywhere. And this is what I would refer to as the food portion of the tour. Here is where we really get into many of the traditional foods of Italy, including tagliarine, which is made with 40, incredibly rich, 30 to 40 egg yolks per kilo of pasta. This is not cucina povera. This is a royal province. This is the home of the kings and the former dukes of the House of Savoy. So this is rich food. So this tagliarine is only topped with butter and white truffles. We're there at the time of the famous white truffle fair in Alba. The perfume of the white truffles here is just extraordinary. Much more, aromatic, much more perfumed than the black truffle. And we actually went to Alba to taste the white truffle on our pasta. And I put this slide in here just to give you a sense of what the white versus black truffles cost. Now, the largest one is in the back row there, second from the left. It's smaller than my fist, so smaller than the fist of a woman, 440 euros. The smallest white truffle, 66 euros, versus a range 12 euros to 33 euros. I'm sorry that I don't have scale here, but that smallest white truffle all the way on the right would be smaller than a golf ball, just to give you a sense of how valuable these white truffles are. Then we went out to different restaurants around in these small towns, very, very food focused, wonderful little restaurants. And I had the pasta that we made in Turin, but this time just plain agnolotti with the meat filling served in a napkin. And I just ate it like popcorn. I mean, this is as classic Italian as you can get. No dressing of any kind, not even butter and sage. The pasta is so good you can just eat it with your fingers, which is what I did. What a treat. Now, I think a highlight for the group would be, I'm speaking for myself, I think they would agree, was our evening dinner at an agriturismo. If you're not familiar with agriturismi are places where tourists can stay, usually small, on a farm or in this case, a vineyard. And they put together a fixed menu of 9 courses, 5 wines, including this wild boar with potatoes that Kella is showing us. And on the right, a very traditional Piemontese dish, vitello tonnato. Vitello means veal. Very thinly sliced veal with tonnato is tuna. I know it sounds very strange. I didn't want to eat it the first time I heard of it either, but it's fantastic. You should really try it. Even if you don't come on my tour, if you're in Italy, in the north, if you see vitello tonnato on the menu, try it. It's this kind of creamy tuna sauce that you spread onto the veal. It's amazing. Lest you think all we did was eat, of course, we also visited some vineyards. Here is a very traditional vineyard where the casks are put into this very ancient cellar that used to be used as an ice house. So this opening that's on the upper right-hand side there, the people would shovel snow down into this storage area. And you can see the channel running down the center there is when the water would melt, the melt water would go down the channel, but they would be able to keep this ice that was formed from this compacted snow all summer long, which then makes it a great place to store wine. Another place that we went to, Canelli, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site because of it's what they call wine cathedrals. Now, these vaulted arched storage areas for wine were purposefully built and go kilometers and kilometers under the town of Canelli. And Canelli, you've never heard of it, but you've probably heard of Asti Spumante. So the Spumante, the sparkling wine, is made in this area, and it is not the cheap stuff. This is Méthode Champenoise. Sorry, I speak Italian, not French. But it is made in the traditional champagne method. These bottles are aged for 3 to 10 years, and they are hand turned. Here you can see the gentleman is turning the bottles. The champagne, this sparkling wine is aged in the bottle and put at an angle so that the must or the I'm sorry, I'm not thinking of it. The silt, for lack of a better word, is seeping down to the bottom of the bottle, which is the neck. And every 3 months, it has to be turned by hand. You can imagine tens of thousands of bottles being turned. And that's why there are these little marks on the bottles of all of the wine. So if you buy a bottle of sparkling wine and it says it's made in a traditional way, look for this telltale mark on the bottle of the wine. Now, this wine is made with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And we, of course, had a wonderful tasting after. Now, I think our famous, I'm just speaking for me personally, I think our favorite vineyard stop was at Maurizio Abbona, which is a producer of a variety of the famous Piemontese wines, including Barolo. He is the son of the original winemaker, and he came down. He was not necessarily supposed to be there. There was a young lady showing us around, but he came down and just took over the tasting for us and started pouring these different wines. And and was grabbing different wines that were special to him. And I had the fortune or misfortune of sitting right next to him. That's my wine glass there. And he looked at me at one point when he could see that I was really, I'm working. I need to remain sober. I was going to pour out this bit of wine left in my glass. We were tasting 5 wines. That's a lot. So I was going to pour it out. And he looked at me and he looked at the group and said, "Don't pour that out. That's my blood." I will never forget that. He's so passionate about this wine. Now, here you see Kella. She's got the wine. She's defying Mauricio's command not to pour it out. You can see he's got his eyes closed, and the gentleman next to Kella has his hands over his face. The horror that she's pouring out this wine. Now, lest you think it's all food and wine there in the countryside, there is some history as well. This is the castle, the home of the Count of Cavour, the first prime minister of Italy, and also a museum today dedicated to the white truffle and the famous wines of the area. It's also the home of the University of Gastronomic Sciences in Pollenzo, which is the home of the slow food movement, and also home to the Wine Bank of Italy, where they have wines from every region in Italy. And for each display, they also have a canister of the soil from which that wine is made. Now, of course, a great highlight from this time was our trip out into the countryside with the dog, going out searching for the truffles ourselves. We were successful. We found some white truffles. And I think what was really magical was at the end of this hunt, it was like an apparition. A table appeared to us, all laden with wine and appetizers and sandwiches, and we had this gorgeous picnic out in the countryside before we got in the van and we headed to our final stop, Lago Maggiore, Lake Maggiore, where we stayed at Stresa. And a highlight there was the tremendous view from the sky bar of our hotel, where the views and the spritzes were fantastic. We had a wonderful boat ride out on Lake Maggiore in a private boat where we got to stretch out because we were a small group. We had a tour of the Borromean Islands, culminating in a guided tour to the Isola Bella, which is famous for its gardens and also its palaces. So we did an interior tour of the palace, and then we were left to explore the wonderful manicured gardens on our own. In the afternoon, we had free time. We had a free lake pass and could go around wherever we wanted. And everyone went to Isola Madre, which had this beautiful botanical garden. And this is early November, and look at the flowers. What was fascinating to me there were these exotic birds that were just left to wander around. I could have stayed there for an hour just watching these very interesting exotic birds, including peacocks, which we all know, but also these pheasants, which I had never seen before. Now, the finale of the trip was our voyage out on the foliage train. We departed from a town up near the Alps called Domodossola, which is a beautiful little medieval town. The gang took a hike uphill to this area called the Sacromonte. They were rewarded with great views and gorgeous weather, which we had throughout the tour after their climb up. And then after grabbing some sandwiches, because they were an adventurous, ambitious group, they got on the train, were rewarded with beautiful views of the fall foliage and the really charming northern Italian, very far northern pre-alpine towns, and finally ending at Locarno on the very northern tip of Lago Maggiore. Next year, I'll be doing this tour again. You can see the dates there. We'll be reversing the order. We'll be starting at Lago Maggiore, going out to the Le Langhe, the wine region again, and ending in Torino. So if you're interested in joining my tour, I'd love to have you. We had a tremendous time, great adventure. fantastic small group and a lot of wonderful undiscovered places.